Hello, and thank you very much for having me. I want to talk today, I'm going to take a very uncontroversial view of education in my country, that it's broken. We know education is broken. But it's actually a little different than we think. People have said that education has gotten worse in the US over the past 50 years. But if you look at the actual data, it's not true. We've been mediocre. We've continued to be mediocre for the last 50 years, as the chart here shows. And so I asked myself, what innovation are we giving up in my country by simply being mediocre? And so I thought about what happens when I go across the world and I work with companies all over the place and look at how they're doing these processes. And I see a lot of companies that themselves are kind of mediocre. Not in a bad way, but they're just kind of there and they're executing very, very well. And they want to get to the next level. And so they ask how they can do that. And it's not just technology companies. It's Pounce Consulting in Mexico, which is an IT company. It's Sasco in Egypt, who does pens. It's Printworks in Lebanon. All these countries are saying, what can I do to advance my business effectively and make a positive change for my shareholders and for my customers? So why is this all important to education? Well, just like those companies have to adapt with the changing world and the changing needs of customers, I contend that education has not kept up with the cognitive demands the world is putting on our kids. We as a society are changing more rapidly than ever. It's truly a chaotic society. If you think about what's happening, governments are falling and rising back up. The amount of information we see every day is exploding. Our social connections are more through things like Facebook, but less personal. We know more people, but don't actually know them very, very well. And so all this data actually causes us to kind of go into a kind of paralysis. If you look at how much data we consume in a given day, the average person consumes 4.6 gigabytes of data every single day. That's a DVD worth of data that you see every single day. And here's what's crazy about that. The amount of data you could consume is growing by leaps and bounds. In 2009, the world created 0.8 zettabytes of data. That means nothing to a lot of you. In 2010, we created 1.8 zettabytes of data. How much is that? It's if you took 57 billion iPads, 32 gig iPads, and stacked them end to end, you could create 2 Great Walls of China with all the data we created in 2010. And what's crazy is by 2020, we'll be creating 35 zettabytes of data. Here's the problem. Our little brains haven't actually kept up with that explosion of data. We can't cope. And certainly the skills we're teaching our kids today in school are not the right ones as it relates to understanding how to make use of this data. So how do we know what to do? This rapid rate of change is almost unbearable. We're very confused. And as fast as we can think of new educational models, they're outdated because the world itself has changed so rapidly. So I thought about companies that I work with and how they handle the problem. There's a movement in the US, and I think also probably here in Brazil, among startups to use a Japanese system of manufacturing called Kaizen. And it's been adapted to something called the lean startup. And in essence, this is a way for companies to optimize how they actually build or create products to make sure they are creating customer value. I'll get into more of that in a second, how it applies to education. And they have to, because in this world today, for these guys, so little is actually constant. And you don't even know the competitor, which may be coming out tomorrow, to take your place. It's literally that fast. So I said, I have a modest proposal. What if we treat educational reform like a lean startup? Kind of crazy. What would this look like? Well, you see, in startups, there's too many variables, too much uncertainty to follow a business plan that you created a year ago and hope that along the way you meet your customer needs. Well, it's just like education. We can't actually assume some program we put in place here is going to meet those needs, and certainly we can't wait a year or 2 years or 5 years to figure out that that program did or didn't work. It doesn't make sense, and we're failing our kids. So the current state of education is much like a startup, actually, when you think about it. There's a limited amount of time that you have to build something. The customers that you have, their needs are increasing, and their worlds are changing around you. And the stakes are incredibly high, at least for those who are building the company or for those students who are in school. So I propose we establish an agile educational reform movement. And agile is a word that's used a lot in the lean startup methodology. It means flexible, able to move quickly, able to change quickly, that sort of thing. And we will create our school reform based on customer feedback. Customers here are students, parents, administrators, teachers, everyone involved with the creation of curriculum for students. And we'll do that by following the lean startup methodology. So let's get into what that actually means. The key principle of lean startup methodology is actually pretty simple. You start with a big, bold vision. You then build a product, which actually you're able to test against that vision using real-world data and customer feedback. And then you decide whether to persevere or go forward or pivot, meaning you change the direction and try something different. That's really all it is. It's a way to accelerate testing of ideas in an environment that you don't control. And that's exactly what we're facing today in educational reform. The big tool inside of Lean Startup actually is I lost my slides. Is this thing called the Build, Learn, Measure system. So you can see it here. In essence, the idea is all about how we can create a vision and how we can create a product that we can test against that vision. But the vision shouldn't be so prescriptive or so limiting that it limits the products we can actually test. We want to create a very all-encompassing vision, because the idea is to test ideas quickly, iterate them, and get through. It's designed to focus on what we call value-creating activities. These are activities that customers of your product, in this case the students, will actually find value and use over and over. It is designed to guard against the problem we have today in education, which is we say things that are unproven. Things like, if we just focus on STEM, we'll create a better, more highly employable workforce. Well, that might be true, but there's not a lot of data to support that long term. So we want to focus on things we can control and move today. So for our school, let's pretend. Let's actually create a vision right now on the spot, and let's create some products. We're going to say our school's vision is going to be, we will build an inclusive, community-centered environment where every student is mentally and physically prepared every day to learn the changing skills required to thrive in a world of constant change. Basically, we're going to create students who can think and who can navigate this world of constant change when we're seeing 4.6 gigabytes of data every single day. Now, from our vision comes our product. This is important. In my world, the vision for Bing, the search engine that I work with, is to reorganize the web for task completion. In other words, reorganize the web so you can do things on it, not just find information. And so one of the products that I might create from that is the ability for a search engine to figure out how to help you find and buy an event ticket. So that's the product I have for my vision. Well, our school, based on our vision, the product could be a new curriculum. It could be new lunchroom standards to help with the physical component. It could be the length and structure of the school day. It could be parental involvement. Lots of different products come to mind when you see that vision. But here's the thing with lean startups. We're not going to do all of them. We're going to do one of them. We're going to create what's called the minimum viable product, or MVP. And this is not what you might think of as the smallest product you could possibly build, but it's the smallest product you can build that will actually test your assumptions of your product against your vision. In other words, the thing you want to build is just enough to where you can gather enough feedback to say, yes, what I'm thinking of doing will help accomplish my vision. So let's create our MVP for our classroom reform. We are going to create a product that basically allows our students to examine an issue from the daily news and list the pros and cons of the issue. We're going to give them research stuff in the class. They're going to go ahead and research this in the morning, and then they're going to actually debate each other so they can really understand all the different points of the issue. So this is our product. This is what we're going to build, just like I'm building a piece of software. So far, so good. Now, we have our product, a new critical thinking task every single day. That's what we're going to do. We now need to understand if this product, this critical thinking task, is going to help our vision, which is to create those adults who can think critically about their world. And to do that, we employ something in lean startup methodology called validated learning. Now, validated learning allows us to decide what things we should actually be measuring that come out of our product. In other words, it's very different than what we do today, where we look at, say, something like reading scores or literacy scores, and because while those measures are very interesting, we have to track them and they're very important, we all know that with that level of data, with that kind of gross measure of data, it's hard to figure out what's actually driving those scores up because there's so many possible variables, so many components that go into that score. So the whole point of validated learning is actually to say, let's break up the measurements into very fine measurements, things that we can test so we can understand what part of our product and what pieces of our product are actually going to work, actually are driving the product forward to meet our vision. So here, our validated learning is going to test this new curriculum idea we have of the pros and cons every morning, and it's going to focus on critical thinking since that aligns with our vision of building adaptable adults. But what are the right measures? That's the question we have to ask ourselves. Is it a score that tests these kids' ability to work through problems? Are there other metrics like the ability to pass an analytic reasoning test? These are all real things in the US now that they're coming out with to figure out how students are actually thinking more critically. To know the right measures, to really understand validated learning, we have to use something the lean startup guys call innovation accounting, which is a very funny name, I think. But innovation and accounting don't always go together. Sorry, accountants, if you're in the room. But the point is that we want to make sure that what we're measuring is measurable and actually helps us understand whether our product is achieving the vision. It consists of three main steps. The first is to establish our baseline. Where are we at today? Understand what our students are doing in the classroom today. And the key about establishing your baseline metrics, they have to be actionable. So for example, here for our product, we may say our baseline metric is the time it takes a student to complete a list of pros and cons of high quality. That's our metric for our product around getting our students to do their debate in the morning. It has to be accessible, meaning that people across the organization can actually understand it. And it has to be auditable, meaning that it actually has to be something you can test and measure repeatedly, not just a one-time thing. So I think our metric here of time it takes for a student to complete a list of pros and cons of high quality is pretty good. We then once we have our baseline metrics, we have to tune the engine. And here's where experimentation really comes into play. This is where it gets a lot of fun, because now you actually start thinking about what can I do differently to my product to make it better, to make it align with our vision more effectively. And this is where the fun comes. The challenge, again, here is to not pick the wrong measures. And so to do that, the lean startup guys do something called the 5 whys. And basically it says whenever you get to a question of what do we do next, you get everyone in a room and you ask the question why 5 times. So, for example, we might notice that our kids in our room aren't getting faster. So our measure is showing that our students aren't getting faster at creating this high-quality list of pros and cons. So we ask why. And so maybe the first why is because they're stuck on generating the first couple ideas. Why? Well, because the kids aren't familiar with the topic. Well, why is that? Well, because they have to read the article and analyze the research. Well, why? Well, because, and that's very time-consuming. So, well, why? Well, there's too much to get through. Well, so why? Well, it's because there's only one of them. Aha. Now we've got an idea. Now we have this idea to experiment. We now can say, what if we pair them up? What if we actually put them together? And by doing that, we might be able to actually improve our score around getting those students to create those lists of high-quality pros and cons very quickly. So this is where you take that unproven leap of faith, that idea, that crystallized idea you have, and begin to actually implement it, run those tests, and see how your numbers actually pan out. This is very different than how companies usually build products. We usually build products actually using a specification. We hand it to developers write the code, we build it, we ship it, we get it in the marketplace, and we hope to God it works. And we know after it's out there for a while whether or not, if it actually was successful. Same kind of thing that we have in education reform today that we have to change. The last part of lean startup is to then decide to persevere or pivot. Using your data, you understanding it, do you say to yourself, yep, this is the right path, this product is good for our mission and our vision, we'll keep going forward, or do you say, actually it doesn't work, and we're going to pivot away, we're going to change our idea behind what our product should actually be. There's lots of different types of pivots. You could decide that one particular aspect of your product was so good, and that becomes your new product. Or you may decide that based on customer data, you have to go a completely different direction. All these things happen every single day in startups. Whew, that's a lot of work. That's a lot of work, especially for a teacher. And that's why startups work 90-hour weeks. It's why they're constantly building, testing, and refining these concepts. And the question we have to ask is, can it work in schools? Is this even possible to implement across our educational system? It certainly applies an entirely new concept of school reform at the school level. It means that within each school, we have to create these committees or create these, create a platform for experimentation. We have to create an innovation team and cultivate a batch of entrepreneurs inside each school. But here's the great part. Everyone can be an entrepreneur. Everyone can propose new tests to run. Everyone can actually become empowered to make change inside their school. Now, districts, of course, and schools must cultivate this. They must encourage people to actually take these risks and think about what potentially they could do to improve their product to meet their vision more successfully. And what's so cool is that when you start doing lean startup, imagine if we did this in every single school, because you have that build, measure, learn feedback loop, innovation actually becomes part of the process, which is so ironic because process and innovation generally don't go together. Because you have this process and this entrepreneurship in place inside the school, everyone now can actually contribute ideas. Everyone can figure out what tests they want to run. Now, what are the risks? The risks are obviously, you might say that what if these tests don't work? Aren't we hurting the kids? Aren't we actually making them worse? Well, I ask you, our current status quo isn't giving us any better results. So I'm not really sure we have a lot of downside here. We haven't progressed materially in the last 50 years. But what are the potential benefits? And this is where it gets exciting. At the beginning of this talk, I showed you how much stuff we're creating. We've talked about how fast the world itself is changing, how we actually live and operate in the world itself is simply changing. And the current rate of educational reform has no chance of keeping up. So the potential to employ something like the lean startup methodology in education reform is to allow us to match the rate of change in the world with our educational system. I contend the only hope really in building educational models that will keep up with the rate of change in society is to change the models themselves at the same speed. It's to turn every single teacher, administrator, student into an entrepreneur, and which itself will have profound impacts on job satisfaction. But most of all, it means we need to take that slow, measured pace of school reform we have now in places across the world. We have to take that and banish it to the dustbin of history. And we must embrace the chaos that exists in our world with a Newtonian fervor commensurate with the challenge. Thanks very much.